Welcome to Block 32 of our Celebrating the States Block of the Month. This is our version of the Nebraska block. For this block, you will need two fabrics, a dark and a light. From a dark fat quarter, cut 6 strips that are 1 1/4 inches by about 20 inches. Instead of cutting each strip separately, I start at the 7 1/2 inch mark and then move backwards to the 6 1/4, the 5, the 3 3/4, 2 1/2, and 1 1/4, so that way I'm not moving the fabric every time I need to cut a strip. If you're using full width fabric, just cut 3 strips that are 1 1/4 inches and then cut them on the fold. You will also need to cut 1 strip that's 2 3/4 inches wide. From that strip, you will cut 4 squares that are 2 3/4 by 2 3/4. From a light fat quarter, cut 7 strips that are 1 1/4 by 20 inches. I only show cutting 6 strips here, but I ended up needing 7 for the block, so cut an extra one of the light. Once you have all your strips cut, it's time to sew. Make sure you're using 1/4 inch seam allowances throughout the block. The first thing to do is to set aside 2 of the dark and 3 of the light strips. Piece the remaining 4 light strips to the 4 dark strips. Press towards the dark fabric. As you're pressing, make sure to straighten the strip set as you go, or it may develop a curve. Add the remaining strips to the strip sets. There will be 1 leftover light strip. 2 of the strip sets will have light strips on opposite sides of a dark strip. Two of the strip sets will have dark strips on opposite sides of a light strip. Once pressed, all of these strip sets should be 2 3/4 inches wide. Press towards the darker fabric. From the strip sets that have the dark strips on the outside, cut 18 sections that are 1 1/4 inch wide and 2 3/4 inch long. I've layered my strip sets. I'm going to cut at the 5 inch mark, the 3 3/4 inch mark, the 2 1/2 inch mark, and the 1 1/4 inch mark. Make sure to save the leftover strip set. From the strip sets that have the light strips on the outside, cut 12 sections that are 2 3/4 wide and 9 sections that are 1 1/4 inch wide. For the sections that are 2 3/4 inch wide, I cut on the 5 1/2 inch mark and the 2 3/4 inch mark. These are called the rail fence blocks. Once I've made sure that I've cut my 12 sections that are 2 3/4 inch wide, I'm going to cut the 1 1/4 inch wide sections. I need 9 of these and I only was able to get 6 from my pieces. I'm going to take one of the dark strips off my leftover set that had the dark strips on both sides and then put the light strip that I cut extra on the other side to make pieces that I can use to cut the 3 remaining 1 1/4 inch wide sets that I need. Now that I have all the strip sets cut, it's time to start making little 9-patch units. We are going to make 9 9-patch units. Because the seams are all pressed to the dark, they should all nest together and make it easy to piece. These 1 1/4 inch strips will finish at 3/4 of an inch in the quilt block. I know they're tiny pieces, but keep on sewing. All 9 of these 9-patch units should have 4 corners where there's dark fabric. For these small 9-patch units, press away from the center row. If you have trouble making these lay flat, a little Mary Ellen's Best Press spray should help. Now we have all the pieces we need to make a block. There will be 5 rows in this block. The outer row is the same on the top and the bottom, and then there's an inner row, also the same on the top and bottom, and then there's one center row. Pay close attention to which way the rail fence block is going. In each row, it's a little bit different. Now we're ready to piece the rows together. There's 2 of the top row, 2 of the second row, and 1 of the bottom row. When sewing the rows, I just worked on 1 row at a time so that I didn't mix up any of the pieces. Where the 9-patch blocks meet the rail fences, sometimes there won't be any seams to match, and sometimes that middle seam will match up, and since you've always pressed towards the dark, they should nest together. For these rows, the second and fourth rows, the rail fence blocks in the center should connect the 2 9-patch blocks, and the rails on the outside should be going the other direction. For these 2 rows, which will be the top and bottom rows, the 9-patch units will be in the corners, and the rail fence blocks will connect them to the center solid square. Now that all the rows are done, it's time to press. For each of the 5 rows, you will always want to press towards the rail fence blocks. I found it easiest to press these from the wrong side. It's much easier to see from the back side which way the seam is going. There are 2 each of the top 2 rows. Sew those together, and then you'll put them on either side of the middle row. Press towards the row that has the solid square. When you lay out the block to sew all the rows together, make sure that the solid squares are always on the outside of the block. If pressed correctly, all the seams should be nesting together as you sew the rows together. You can pin if desired, but I found it easier to just line it up as I went along and make adjustments as necessary. When all the rows are put together, the block will measure 11 3/4 by 11 3/4 at this point. We will need to add 1-inch strips to all 4 sides and then trim it down to our needed size of 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Press towards the center row. The outer strips you can either use light or dark fabric. Cut 4 strips that are 1 inch by the width of fabric. Sew 2 strips to the quilt block on opposite sides. Trim the excess strip 1/4 inch beyond the edge of the block. You're going to press towards the strip. Just 2 seams left and our Nebraska block is done. Trim the excess fabric beyond the seams. Press towards the outer strip And then it'll be time to trim the block down to 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. I used my 12.5 inch ruler, centered it from that center square, and then just trimmed all 4 sides. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the block. We hope you will hit the like button, leave a comment for us, share with your quilting friends, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and happy quilting!